Hello everyone, I'm Molly Campbell and I'm a senior science writer for the online science publication Technology Networks. The biotech and pharma industries are incredibly important for human health, helping scientists to develop new medicines, diagnostic tools, and other technologies. But at what cost to the environment? Today I'm joined by James Connelly, the Chief Executive Officer at My Green Lab. My Green Lab is a non-profit organisation that is fundamentally improving the sustainability of scientific research. In our conversation today, we'll be talking about My Green Lab's latest report on the carbon impact of the biotech and pharma industries, discussing some of the key results and findings and what we can do to further improve the sustainability of both of these industries. So James, to start with, can you please tell us why it's so important that we understand the carbon impact of biotech and pharma sectors and how is this reflected in the report?
Yeah, for a long time, the idea in the industry was science is too important. And it is important. We're creating life-saving medical treatments. We're creating new technical innovations that become the foundation of our economy, and we're advancing society every day through scientific research. So we've sort of ignored the fact that that scientific research also has a significant carbon footprint and overall environmental impact. So what this report does is it quantifies, and was the first report when released first in 2021, the total carbon impact of the industry, looking across all three scopes, so both up and down the value chain, as well as the emissions controlled by the companies themselves. So it provides a complete overview of the environmental impact of science, as well as identifying key leverage points and opportunities for change within that value chain.
Brilliant. And can you discuss what are, in your opinion, some key examples of progress that are highlighted in the new report?
Yeah, one thing that's really exciting is if we look just in the past year, carbon intensity for the top 15 and the top 25 companies have started to decrease. So actually, we're starting to decouple growth of the biotech and pharmaceutical industry from increased carbon output. So that overall trend, I think, is really exciting. Another thing that we highlight in the report is the opportunities for collective action. Biotech and pharma share a vast and very interconnected global supply chain. So when they act together, and in fact, only if they act together, are they able to influence their suppliers and create the change necessary at scale to get the whole industry to drive towards net zero by 2050 or sooner. In fact, the report found that not only is scope 3, or impact from the broader value chain, the largest proportion of the carbon footprint of the industry, 5.2 times higher than scope 1 and 2 combined. We also found that, unfortunately, while the top companies are driving reductions, particularly in the past year, if you look at a broader subset of the industry, if you look at the broader industry as a whole, we're actually seeing carbon intensity increase, which really underlines a point that you really have to look all across the value chain, and you can only influence the value chain through collective action.
Sure. And was there a finding in the report that surprised you?
Yeah, I think, seeing carbon impact continue to increase, looking at that broader data set, we had hoped that we were turning the tide on that a little bit more, but the data doesn't lie. One thing that was very interesting in the data was the carbon impact of companies based in Asia Pacific tend to be about twice as high for scope 1 and 2 compared to companies based in Europe or North America, which goes to show, again, the same point around the value chain. Actually, the majority of American and European biotech and pharma companies' carbon footprint is actually the offshore contract research, contract manufacturing, et cetera, that's within their supply chain.
Okay, so only 10% of the 91 public companies studied have targets that are validated by the Science Based Targets Initiative to be aligned with a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase world. So for our readers that are less familiar with the Science Based Targets Initiative, can you explain what this is and what your thoughts are on that percentage?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So the Science-Based Target Initiative is a global initiative to help bring some rigor and accountability when a company says they're going to be net zero carbon. So they have a methodology that takes a company's emission reduction target and evaluates it to see whether that emission reduction target is aligned to a 1.5 degree world, a 2 degree world, um, a 3 degree world. And unfortunately, a lot of the targets that are being set in biotech and pharma are not aligned with 1.5 degree world, which is the line the IPCC warns we must not cross if we're to avoid the worst and cascading impacts of global climate change. So it's a really, really important metric. However, I want to give the industry some credit. 10% is actually pretty good when you look across all of our global industries. And the fact that we're seeing that number grow and the number of companies participate is really important. And having an SBTI aligned target is a relatively kind of new requirement that corporate sustainability teams are putting forth and holding their suppliers accountable to. And there's a lot of collective action happening here too. The largest companies are getting together through the Sustainable Markets Initiative to set a standard for supplier requirements that include a science-based target aligned net zero goal by 2050. So it's another example of where collective action can really drive impact. And the biggest companies, the top 25, they already are setting these targets. But again, they're only a small fraction of the overall industry. So they have to push, educate, and cajole, inspire their peers to follow along with them, as well as their suppliers, if we're to have a hope within this industry that we can get to 1.5 or remain under 1.5.
Sure, thank you, James. The report highlights how accurate reporting and practical action plans will be really important for reducing carbon emissions. Can you expand on this point for our readers, please?
Yeah, I think, we have to move at this point beyond commitments to real action. And what that takes to go from commitments to real action is actually the establishment of good baselines from which to measure from. If you look at the Scope 3 data, it's calculated using a lot of assumptions. In our data in the report, we have to make a lot of inferences to fill in the gaps where there's not good data available that companies haven't reported on. So that makes it hard for us to establish a baseline. So if we don't have a baseline, it's difficult to really measure the impact of reduction efforts. I think the other challenge is, you're not done when you've set your zero carbon goal. That's the beginning. That's the first step along a journey where you actually have to put practical and tangible actions into the hands of your organization itself, as well as within your supply chain. So My Green Lab certification is really a tool to take high-level, organizational level goals and turn them into practical action on the ground in an area of research that's often left behind because the idea is you can't do something about it, and it's so important anyway. Labs and lab supply chains. We do that through our My Green Lab certification tool for labs. And then we also have a program called ACT for laboratory supplies that provides a consistent way to measure and evaluate and eventually determine the carbon footprint of products so that you can start to baseline and drive real reductions that are measurable. And that's where we really need to get to. It's time not only to set big goals, we got to get to work and make them happen on the ground.
Thank you, James. I'm glad you brought up My Green Lab certification because I'd like to ask you, with biotech and pharma expanding at the rate that it is, can you discuss how important that certification is going to be going forward?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that it's a growing sector, and it's a growing sector for a very good reason. We're creating life-saving and world-transforming treatments, innovations all the time. But we have to be able to have that growth without the carbon input that has been growing at the same rate as the growth of the industry in the past. And so we're starting to see that in the top 25 companies, that they're actually embracing tools like My Green Lab certification. They're buying renewable energy. They're setting SBT aligned targets for a 1.5 degree world. They're setting net zero goals that are even sooner. So My Green Lab is really part of a very important toolkit to help organizations align their overall organizational values with what they're doing on the ground. In addition, it's really important that the people within a company are involved in their sustainability initiative for it to be true, and for it to resonate with the company itself. So many companies have big goals, they do power purchase agreements, but the employees working in the lab at the bench don't know what they can do. So My Green Lab is a really important way to align overall corporate values with what's happening at the lab. And the lab is really the brain or the heart of the industry. And if we can change people's minds and we can get them thinking about how to incorporate sustainability, we can influence things downstream and treatments before they're created. You know, it takes about a decade to bring a drug to market. You're not going to change it once it's been FDA approved. So actually, to get at some of the bulk of our very difficult to address footprint, we need to look upstream. How are we thinking about that product? How are we doing scale up? And that's why we think it's so important to engage directly at the lab. And that's why My Green Lab certification has been selected as a breakthrough outcome by the UN Race to Zero. For the biotech and pharma sector, they basically set a goal that 95% of labs have to be My Green Lab certified at the highest level by 2030 or sooner. And many companies are already on the pathway to achieve that, but we need to scale it up and we need to scale it into the supply chain. And that's why we're very excited, in fact, to announce an initiative with the largest pharma companies, a collective action initiative where they're going to be incentivizing and then eventually requiring all the CROs, CDMOs, CMOs within their supply chain that tend to be located in Asia Pacific, which has the highest carbon intensity, to pursue My Green Lab certification and integrate sustainability into the core of their suppliers' company values.
Thank you so much, James, for joining us at Technology Networks to discuss the findings of My Green Lab's latest reports. If you'd like to access the full report, please make sure to check out the video description below, where you can also find some further coverage of the key findings. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.